Hi everyone, welcome to Last Book Alive. So today we are talking about this book. It's called If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffrey. It was shortlisted for this year's Booker Prize, which actually will be announced next week, I believe next Sunday. So yeah, let's get into it. And my notes are all over the place. I just want to show you my notes, like how so just excuse me if I don't follow through very smoothly because I had a lot of thoughts and then it was all over the place and things like that. But anyway, so this book, If I Survive You, was published by the Fourth Estate in 2022. And it's basically a novel that's mostly based in Miami, Florida, in the US. And we basically but even though it's based in Miami, some of the events do take place in Kingston, Jamaica, and in the Midwest of the US, which we don't really know specifically where in the Midwest. So we follow the life and struggle of Trelawney, who is a first-generation Jamaican American, and basically we are with him as he tries to secure a life for himself. He is actually, I just checked, he's named after an area in Jamaica. It's also called Trelawney. So throughout the book, Trelawney is basically asked the question, what are you? Not who are you, but what are you? And it almost feels like his whole life is a struggle to answer this question, but also to deal with the people who ask it. So there are three main events that this book is linked to that actually happened in real life. The first is the political violence in Jamaica, which took place in the 1970s. The second is Hurricane Andrew, which hit Florida as well as the Bahamas and Louisiana in August of 1992. And the third is the 2008 recession, which hit the US, but also then it expanded to be all over the world, and there was a huge amount of job loss. So I wanted to actually connect each of these events with where narrator Trelawney is placed throughout the book. One of the interesting things that stood out for me about this book is that the point of view changes. So sometimes it's first person, sometimes it's third person, and sometimes it's second person. And the way that it happens, it's very seamless. So it's not like jarring or it doesn't seem odd. It kind of flows with the story. The second thing is that at the beginning of this book, where it says, where it gives the copyright information, it actually tells us that, which obviously I will not find, oh, right here. It actually tells us that many of these stories were published independently in different literary journals, and then they came together in this book, which I think is really, which I think is interesting because, as writers, we feel like sometimes a novel needs to have like a consistent narrative, and this book did come together in the end. But the fact that it started out as these offshoots, as these short stories, is also interesting. And I would like to know more about how it all came together. Anyway, so let's begin. I want to start with the first aspect, the first historical event that this book is connected to, which is the political violence that plagued Jamaica in the 1970s. It actually started in the 1960s, and it was between two parties, the two main political parties in Jamaica. The first is the Jamaica Labour Party, and the second is the People's the People's National Party. And these two, so the JLP, which is the Jamaica Labour Party, was backed by the CIA, and the PNP was backed by Cuba and Russia. And this is the 1970s. Cuba is, there's the Cuban Revolution has happened, and Castro is the most popular political leader in the world, and there's a lot of change happening, and then it will be followed by the Cold War. But basically, both of these political parties armed their armed gangs that were already present in Jamaica, but they armed them with guns, which previously they didn't have. And then basically all these gangs engaged in violence, and they killed off, the opposing party's supporters, and then it basically spread through the civilian population in general. So in Kingston, in Jamaica actually, 800 people died in the 1980s, in the general election of 1980. So these acts of violence used to escalate during the elections, and I'm going to link the sources for where I'm getting this from in the captions. So this is the political violence that Trelawney's family flees. So they're based in Kingston. They flee Kingston to Miami. Okay, now I'm going to go to my notes, which are extremely confusing, so please excuse me a little bit. But yeah, so it's actually Trelawney's father, Christopher, who's also known as Topper, and his mother, Sania, as well as the firstborn, Trelawney's elder brother, Delano. They flee Kingston, all of them flee Kingston to Miami, and that's where Trelawney is born. The main, I would say, the main relationship that that is the thread throughout this book is Trelawney's relationship with his father. And his father is kind of, the father's kind of puzzled by Trelawney, and then exasperated by him, and then withdraws from him. And basically this is the relationship that is one of the focal points of the book. So yeah, I wanted to read a bit from the book where it shows how he never really quite understood or understands, at least for now, understands his son. And this is part of a chapter called Under the Ackee Tree, and this chapter is narrated by Topper, Trelawney's father. And so he talks in a Jamaican accent, which obviously I cannot do as hard as I try, but I will do my best. Okay, not with the accent, but with the reading. Okay. It Trelawney you start worry after, because even when Delano don't do too well in school, him is a boy who will make something out of nothing. The day him graduate, Delano start him own landscape business with money you loan him, and have man your age working under him. But when you pick up Trelawney from Sania's new house in West Miami, the boy can't hold nobody eye when him talk, and him barely talk, like him afraid of his own voice. Him dress up in baggy clothes and hoodie, like him hiding even when it's summer. You stop bring him down to your house, because the first time you see how it pain him to watch him, brother and you living where him once had a proper family. It lost him feel, but you wonder whether it also envy of him, brother. You take Trelawney out to eat instead every few weeks. I actually really like the fact that the father had his own chapter where he could tell his own story, so that he's not just placed as this very clear-cut antagonist against Trelawney, who is the protagonist. And we see what he sacrificed and what his losses were in life and what his regrets were as well. So there's some empathy that I developed for him. It wasn't much because he wasn't one of my favorite characters, because he caused Trelawney a lot of pain, but still it was through him that we saw Jamaica, and how Kingston basically exploded into this violence, and how his family was also affected, even though they were quite well off in Kingston. So we don't just see him as a villain, but as someone who has genuinely tried and failed, and this especially in America, where he's trying to support his family and to be a man. One of the ways that masculinity, or in some ways toxic masculinity, works is to always force men into the role of a provider, and he does take this role, and when he fails at it, there's shame and resentment, and maybe even to a certain extent rejection of his family. But then we see that he does rise up, and he does acquire things in America, like homes, and that's where I think I kind of lost kind of empathy for him, because Trelawney in the coming chapters, he is going to become homeless, and he's going to really struggle because of the recession, but he never helps him. His father never helps him. So and obviously that's a source of like a huge amount of pain for Trelawney. So I wanted to read a little bit of that because I was like, what? But yeah. So this is actually okay, this is the part where Trelawney has some really interesting conversations with people, and the people that he meets are also very interesting because almost always they have race always comes up, and it always is the nature of the talk about race is always this sense of bewilderment towards his race, and towards the idea of blackness. Like we see how internalized racism is in people because of its just absolute rejection of being associated with blackness, and so there's this part where he's talking to a woman, what's her name, let's see. So yeah, so he's homeless and he is basically going on Craigslist to look at ads where he can get jobs, and he always gets attracted to the weirdest jobs. I don't know why, but this is where this woman basically has put up this ad where she is going to pay someone to hit her, to punch her in the face, and so this is and basically they're going back and forth, and then she says, like, she's scared that her father is going to find out that he is black, and she says that it's not that my family's racist, but like she tells the story of how this guy she brought home was dark complexioned, and her father just lost it. Okay, so this is the dialogue that takes place. The funny part is, she said, Ravi wasn't even black, he was South Asian. Hilarious, I agreed. This is Trelawney speaking in first person. Hilarious, I agreed, but I felt sick with hatred. For her father, yes, for all fathers, for their propensity for passing down the worst of themselves. How was it that her post hadn't read, sorry, no racists, sorry, no child abusers? So yeah, so he still carries that resentment, and resentment, I would say, not hatred, for his father, and yeah, it percolates into this thought. And one of the really touching moments where we see how Trelawney has longed for acceptance from his father is at a time when his brother Delano and his father agree, are basically taking their dog 007 to get neutered. Okay, so I wanted to read this bit to you. It was then that we resolved to have 00 neutered. We made the appointment for the procedure, but as my father pulled into the vet's parking lot one Saturday afternoon in July, Delano in the front passenger seat, Double in the back seat trembling between Cookie and me, we began contemplating what it meant for Double to lose his testicles. I grappled silently with the weight of wiping out Double's line, and Cookie never voiced an opinion within earshot of an adult, but my brother expressed his concern this way. I'd rather be dead than have my balls chopped off. My father nodded. It's what makes a man, but it's you boys' decision. He's yours to look after. I didn't know what was right in that moment, but I wanted to be like them, to partake in manhood as they did. No, that's not exactly it. I wanted to be with them, to be caught up in the love that linked the men of my family. I had begun feeling the weight of our age gap, Delano entering my father's world and leaving mine. So I threw my hands over my crotch, lowered and shook my head as though too pained to discuss the situation. At that, Dad put the car in reverse and we headed home, agreeing to tell Mom that the vet's office had been inexplicably closed. It was perhaps the one time I had felt such belonging. Yeah. Okay, now we come to the second event in the book, which is Hurricane Andrew. So this was a Category 5 hurricane, and as I said, it happened in 1992. It hit Florida pretty bad, especially Dade County, and he actually mentions Dade County in the book. It left 23 dead in the US and 3 in the Bahamas, though the figures vary. Like some sources put it at a higher death toll, but I found this on the Weather Channel, so I just went with that. And it cost 27 billion in damages. Hurricane Andrew did. So this hurricane actually hits when Trelawney is a child, and it uproots him and his family from their home. It basically, what he says is that the hurricane ripped the roof right off of my home. So from then on, there's this and this is like he's going back and forth, right, as stories all mostly do, but it kind of feels like that was a turning point, because from then on there's this feeling of him being uprooted, and that connects both to his identity and not being able to define himself. Am I black? Am I Jamaican? Am I American? Am I a mix? What am I? Like, he really struggles with that, so that kind of uprootedness, but also physical uprootedness. So when he loses that home, he moves into several different homes, and then eventually we find him, becoming homeless. So, I wanted to actually read especially so we begin to become familiar with his struggle right from the very beginning, but especially when he's in high school. And this is actually the first line of the book. It begins with, "What are you?" Hollered from the perimeter of your front yard when you're 9, younger probably. You'll be asked again throughout junior high and high school, then out in the world, in strip clubs, in food courts, over the phone, and at various menial jobs. The askers are expectant. They demand immediate gratification. Their question lifts you slightly off your pre-adolescent toes, tilting you, not just because you don't understand it, but because even if you did understand this question, you wouldn't yet have an answer. Perhaps it starts with, what language is your mother speaking? This might be the genesis, not because it comes first, but because at least on this occasion you have some context for the question when it arrives. You immediately resent this question. Why does your mother talk so funny? Your neighbor insists. Your mother calls to you from the front porch, has called from the perch overlooking the sloping yard, since you were allowed to join the neighborhood kids to play. Always, this signals that playtime is over. Only now, shame has lashed itself to the ritual. Perhaps you had hoped no one would ever notice. Perhaps you had never noticed it yourself. Perhaps you ask in shallow protest, "What do you mean? What language?" Maybe you only think it. Ultimately, you mutter English. She speaks English, before going inside, head tucked in embarrassment. In this first moment, for the first time, you are ashamed of your mother, and you are ashamed of yourself for not defending her. More than to be cowardly and disloyal, though, it's shameful to be foreign. If you have learned anything during your short residence on Earth, you've learned this. What a beautifully written book. And this is, so he tries, so there's a bit that I'm not going to read, but I wanted to summarize because he tries to fit in, right? In high school, he tries really badly to fit in, and in middle school, which is junior high. And so he tries to fit in with the Puerto Ricans, and they reject him because he doesn't speak Spanish, even though physically, in appearance, he looks Puerto Rican. Jamaicans reject him because he talks like a white person. And African Americans reject him because he looks white. And so it's his brother Delano who finally tells him that he is black because of the one-drop rule. So the one-drop rule, as it was explained to me by a friend, is that basically if you even have one drop of blood that is from a black person, so one of your parents or down the line, one of your ancestors, then you are black. So so I mean, there's this basically he's trying to figure out race and its connection, and with it the idea of racism and how to deal with it from a very, very young age, and from a time when he doesn't even have the language to define himself. You know, as he said, like, how am I even going to answer this question, you know? So that's his childhood. But then, you know, it doesn't stop there, because once he also self-identifies as black, then there's the other side of it, which is the exotification and also the vilification, right? The hair. Like in one instance, a principal in his school where he's teaching tells him to cut his hair, or he's going to set a bad example for the other African Americans. Or one of the most disturbing interactions that he has is with this really rich, white, young, beautiful couple, Morgan and Tim, and I'm not going to get into it because I really want you to read the book, and it's very disturbing. But they completely exoticize him, and, you know, so that is, yeah, so that also then kind of reinforces the idea that you can be either, you can be or, but if you're not white in America, you're screwed, basically. There's no other way to put it. Sorry to be not so eloquent. Okay. One thing I wanted to come back to, though, was the house that he was uprooted from when Hurricane Andrew hit. I feel like throughout the book he's like trying to rescue it, you know, like he does, like it almost seems like if he does this, everything is gonna be all right, and eventually he has to let go of this idea. And this is tied to his relationship with his father, because even with his father, he's trying to convince his father to give him the house instead of his brother. And again, he's forcing acceptance from his father. So just like he's holding on to the house, he's holding on to you know, his father, and expectations from his father, more like it. And he struggles to let go of this. And I don't know, maybe I felt like it was again like a search for roots, right? Like the search for connect, like if he feels like if he's connected, if his father accepts him, then maybe he will get some sense of self, or maybe he'll feel rooted somewhere. Maybe if he gets this house, if he owns it, he'll get a sense of, you know, like this house being his, and so therefore him having a sense of self or being rooted in something. So he eventually, you know, we see that the book kind of, that he does let go of this, but it's not really eventually, it kind of happens abruptly towards the end. And I really wish that the author delved more into how he let go of it, because it happens quite suddenly, and I wanted that to be something that was stretched out a bit and discussed a little bit more. Okay, now the third point, which is the recession. Yay! So a fun fact, I graduated from my journalism college in 2009, and we are actually called the batch of recession. Somebody trying to be funny while, you know, making fun of a very sad situation. But the recession in 2008 is when he's in college, and or he just graduates, and about 8.6 million people lost their jobs in the US and 14 million worldwide, and this actually hit a lot of the developed countries. And I'm actually watching a documentary about it. It's called The Inside Job. I'm gonna see how it is, but it actually talks about the recession and how the banks and multinational corporations, of course, you know, led the charge that caused the recession. Post 2008 recession, we find Trelawney homeless, and then eventually he gets a job in Miami working at a building that primarily caters to senior citizens, and it's subsidized housing. So he actually collects rent from them. And it is in this chapter, Independent Living, that we actually come to see the underbelly, well, in this chapter, but also others, but we come to see the underbelly of Miami. You know, we come to see the struggles that people have of living in Miami, of the like exorbitant rent, like really high rent, you know, sinking houses because of the hurricanes, drugs, and yeah, so it's through his struggles that we see this aspect of the city. But also, it's not just all like very serious. Like, this novel is actually really funny as much as it is full of pain. While Trelawney is working at this elderly only apartment complex, he actually has to hound them to collect rent. And it's very, very ruthless. Like, he has become very ruthless. So the Trelawney that we knew from childhood, who's trying to figure out who he was, this Trelawney is ruthless because he knows the game now. He knows what it takes to move ahead. Even though he's failing and moving ahead, he knows that, you know, so he'll do what it takes to secure income, and, you know, as he says in the book, to secure a toilet in which he can with dignity relieve himself, you know. As I said, he works in an elderly apartment complex, and he hounds down the elderly to collect rent. His boss he calls El Jefe, or the boss, which is basically a term of endearment as far as I understand, that, you know, people use it, like, but I think that he means it in like a cynical way, or like, you know, kind of like he's making fun of him. And in this chapter we see like how the elderly are preyed upon through the so-called subsidized housing. Okay, so I'm gonna read you a bit, and I honestly don't think this is fiction. I think this is probably true. Okay, where are you, darling? Here it is. I like how he knows his own place, you know, like he's like, I'm the rent collector. I'm a bad person, but I need to live. Okay. The downside of being the face of rent increases in a low-income development is that the residents wish you dead. Not a month goes by that I don't receive hate mail. It arrives in the form of letters mailed to us from our tenants' family members. How can you raise my mother's rent? You want her to starve? The letters ask. If you're really non-profit, how come you're so damn greedy? There lies the largest misconception people have about government-subsidized housing. People figure it's in our interest to charge the elderly as little rent as possible. In reality, Silver Tower's mission is threefold: increase the property's value, maintain high occupancy, and keep rents climbing. And because it's so difficult, because it's a low-income housing, so you know, it is in demand, and particularly because it caters to the elderly. There's obviously bribery happening. He takes bribes, and obviously El Jefe takes bribes. But I wanted to read a moment that was, but also, like, you know, they can't just collect the rent, right? Like, they also have to interact with the residents, and they have to be kind of nice. Like, it's kind of like a dance, you know, where they have to collect, so they have to be nice, but they also are the ones in charge, so they're also owed the money. So it's kind of like a dance between the people, the elderly people who live there, and Trelawney and his is El Jefe. So I wanted to read this part. Okay. Since I took this job, I've had to cultivate what I like to call leasing Spanish. Spanish being the predominant language spoken here, Russian the distant second. I get the building's engineers to fulfill maintenance requests through hand gestures and miming, and our mutually limited though ever-expanding knowledge of one another's languages. Una problema con la puerta en apartamento number 512, I'll write on the work order, when a tenant complains of a squeaky door. The original complaint itself will have been acted out for me, with the tenant making screeching noises as he opens and closes my office door. When my 9th grade Spanish comes up short, I break down and call El Jefe to come help translate. He, of course, thinks it a monumental waste of his time, but I'm supposed to be helping him with his English, so he'll generally acquiesce. Truthfully, our trade-off is a sham, because dude speaks English about as well as any community college grad in Miami-Dade County. Every now and again, he'll disfigure an idiom saying, for better or for worst, and I'm supposed to correct him. I did it first, but I've begun to believe he goes out of his way to exaggerate his English deficiency to appear foreign or local, depending how you look at it. Over the course of a year, El Jefe's English has deteriorated rapidly, a political move to gain influence with the Cuban community's older generation, I suspect. He insists he belongs to this community, but he's admitted too that his almond skin, his full lips, his too round nose, and his tight curls are viewed among many of his brethren with distrust and contempt. ¿Eres Dominicano? I've heard about a dozen of our Cuban residents ask him. When they ask, I see the hurt drowning the corners of his eyes. Dominicano mi pinga, he answers, soy cubano. They act like there's no color back on the island, El Jefe once told me. They act like Africa doesn't pump through Cuba's veins. The absurdity of such pronounced colorism is, in his view, topped only by the fact that despite my 20-odd years in Miami, I still haven't learned Spanish. How do you even get by? How do you talk to your neighbors? That he needs English tutoring is what's unfathomable. I suggested that perhaps he's just bad with grammar. So he took our lessons to the next level. He'll say, what's the word for, and point at something unbelievable like a pencil sharpener or the sole of his shoe. And I'll say, tip whittler or foot bottom. Funny. Ooh, I love books. Okay. So, these were some of the good parts of the book. Some of the things that that didn't connect with me. One is like, there's this brilliant short story called Splashdown. But it's not about Trelawney or his brother. It's about this other character, Cookie, who does appear, but he appears as a minor character. So I didn't, and then once the chapter about him finishes, then he doesn't appear again. So I was just wondering why it was that there was this one chapter just about him it didn't kind of fit in the whole narrative. But I mean, that's okay. It doesn't have to fit so well. A novel doesn't have to be, like a perfect puzzle. But I really enjoyed it though. But the main thing that I found like a little exasperating was like Trelawney kind of keeping on sabotaging himself, even when there's no need to. Like, like his like, I don't want to give away too much, but like, remember how I talked about how he really wants a home and he'll do anything for it, and he's trying to buy this house, but it kind of feels like over and over again, he gets information that would let him know very obviously that this is a bad decision, and he still goes ahead with it, then he goes back on it, then he goes ahead with it. So it's kind of like a push and a pull, but it kind of continues a little bit longer than I didn't feel like there needed to be so much of that, and for him to keep on sabotaging himself by trying to get money to get this house. So it felt like a little bit forced. But generally I like this book, and I liked how the short stories came together. I really hope that happens with me and my short stories, although I doubt it. But anyway, this book, it talks about what community means, how it can support us, but how also it can alienate us. It talks about masculinity and how difficult it is to gain acceptance as a man, as a Jamaican American, and as a Black man. Not just within the community, but also within one's family and with people whom one loves the most. And then lastly, it talks about how cities that we love, like he loved Miami, maybe sometimes they can never be our home and never love us back like we want them to, in the truest sense of the word. But though the book doesn't conclude, like we don't see there's no afterword, but I do hope that Trelawney is okay wherever he is, and that Miami has finally given him what he wants, because he's definitely earned it. So I hope that he finds a really nice apartment of his own, and he finds somebody who loves him for himself, doesn't ask him weird questions, and he definitely doesn't have the need to go on Craigslist again, because that's dangerous. Don't do it, Trelawney. Don't do it again, okay? But that's it from me. yeah, today's Friday. Have a good weekend. And yeah, the book is called If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffrey. Have a good one, y'all. Bye. Take care.